For the sake of context, I suggest that you watch this previous upload of mine or any one of these fanfic reads before you actually get started, unless you don't care or you've already done that, in which case, welcome to another Hans von Hozel fanfic read. This time it's going to be a bit different in the sense that I'm going to read multiple stories of his, but of the same genre, you might say. For you see, today we will be taking a deep dive into Hans von Hozel's brief, yet very impactful fascination with the Beatles. You might even say that we will be going across the universe. 7 times, in fact, because that's how many stories Hans wrote in the Across the Universe fandom, which is of course a fandom dedicated to the Beatles on fanfiction.net. But most importantly, this video is going to highlight Hans's most recognizable critic, a critic that you might say hated Hans's kraut-filled guts. And so let's begin with Yellow Submarine. The Beatles had made a finish of a build Yellow Submarine. Liverpool, say the Beatles, as they made a going in the submarine. They made a driving across the sea. Liverpool, say the Beatles. In Sweden's, ABBA made a watching on the news. Why have Beatles made submarine? Asked ABBA. We should create that are stealing. Meanwhile, the Beatles were making a landing of their submarine. Liverpool, say the Beatles. ABBA waited until the Beatles made goings away and made the submarine their stealing. Liverpool? Asked the Beatles. You can no have submarines now, laugh ABBA as they ride away on Yellow Submarine. Liverpool! Shout the Beatles. Suddenly, Beatles fans made a going to the Beatles. We are annoyed at you lose the submarine, shout fans. Liverpool, say the Beatles. The fans were very annoyed at loose the submarine and made a chasing Beatles. Liverpool, say the Beatles, as the ABBAs made a drivening in their submarine. I should also clarify right now that if you do not have the thickest of skins and more importantly, consider yourself to be a Beatle maniac, then I suggest that you end this video right now, because we're only just beginning. You see, this story, unlike von Hozel's other stories, garnered a very negative reception, with many people calling him an idiot, mostly due to the consistent usage of the word Liverpool. However, one person took it to a whole nother level. His name is Sam, at least in real life it is, but he's more well known as Sergeant Pepper. For you see, Mr. Pepper decided to write this scathing review of Hans von Hozel's Yellow Submarine. And as you can probably tell, this review is so big, so vulgar, and so antagonistic of von Hozel's abilities as an author that I actually had to cut it into multiple sections. It is quite noteworthy as well that his first name is Sam, and if we are to believe that Pepper is in fact his last name, then in theory, his full name is Sam Pepper. Or I guess, Sergeant Sam Pepper. But moving on. Now, as you can probably tell, Sergeant Pepper really hated Hans's guts, to the point where he dug around a bit, and he ended up finding yet another Beatles-related story made by Hans, uploaded prior to Yellow Submarine. The Beatles were stand in the city. Liverpool, say the Beatles. Suddenly, ABBA used their Swedens to denube into the city. Liverpool, say the Beatles. You make a badly music, say ABBA. Liverpool, say the Beatles. Stop saying Liverpool, say ABBA. Liverpool, say the Beatles. And so ABBA got a super trooper. Liverpool, say the Beatles. And so ABBA whacked all of the Beatles with a Super Trooper. Yes, say ABBA, this is goodly. And so ABBA denooed back to Sweden. So this story, Across the Universe, really didn't sit well with Sgt. Pepper. In fact, he ended up writing this review under Across the Universe, just as equally hateful as the previous one, with some added shock over the fact that Hans wrote yet another Beatles story. And this got Sgt. Pepper so mad that he ended up emailing Hans von Hozel over how offensive his Beatles stories were. Emails that eventually got Hans's attention. On May 28, 2009, Hans would release another story of his, and this time, it had a description that was quite telling, if I do say so myself. I got an annoy emailings from Sgt. Pepper to say take down stories of Beatles, so a writing more, the Beatles make a stealing of strawberries from the field. The Beatles made a standing in strawberry fields. Liverpool, say the Beatles. The Beatles made a seeing of ABBA in the field. Liverpool, say the Beatles, as they made a picking strawberries. ABBA saw the Beatles making a steal strawberries. You are steal strawberries, yell ABBA. Look, shout fans, the Beatles are making a stealing. The farmers were very annoyed at the stealing strawberries and made a chasing Beatles. Liverpool, shout Beatles, but of the only one strawberry. ABBA made a laughing at the Beatles. This is goodly, say ABBA, laughing at the chasing of Beatles, and then they made their denoob back to Sweden's. So this story is quite interesting, you might say, because as far as I'm aware, this is the only instance in which one of Hans's story descriptions explicitly mentions a fan. And if Hans wanted Sgt. Pepper's attention, for whatever reason, he got it. Pepper would release one of many negative reviews under Strawberry Fields, however, his was a lot more lengthy, almost as lengthy as his first one, and just as memorable. Quote, "Why can't you at least get your facts right, you stupid kraut?" He was a bit pissed, which is quite hilarious considering literally 24 hours after uploading Strawberry Fields, Hans would write Penny Lane. The Beatles were stand in Liverpool. It was many Penny Lane. Liverpool, say the Beatles. Fans made a gather around the Beatles. Liverpool, say the Beatles, sign autographs. Yay, Beatles, say fans. ABBA saw from behind the trees as the Beatles were getting a fan's attention. Is no goodly that the Beatles can have fans' attention, say ABBA. We must make a getting of these. And so, ABBA jumped out from behind the trees, all the fans made observing at ABBA. Oh my god, ABBA! And all the fans made a rushing over to ABBA. Laughed ABBA. Liverpool, say a sadly Beatles. ABBA danced around with the fans. Liverpool, shout the Beatles, try to get fans' attention, but of not paying attention. So then, the Beatles made a getting out a lots of cash to distract the fans to go to Beatles. All the fans made a run over to Beatles with their cash and took the cash and went back to Mini ABBA. Ha 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 ha, you lost your cash, say ABBA. Liverpool, made an angry Beatles, but suddenly the fans got distracted yet again. Disney had made a hypnotizing of the fans and the fans all went over to them. No! Shout ABBA. Hypnotizing is a cheating. Liverpool! Shout the Beatles. This no goodly, shout ABBA. We must make a not hypnotized. And so, ABBA used their Swedens and denoobed at Disney's. You cannot combat our hypnotizing with your denoob, shout Disney. But suddenly, ABBA zapped a laser beam and no more Disneys. This is goodly, say ABBA as a not Disney. Liverpool, say a happy Beatles, get a balloon celebrate, and all the fans throw a rotten fruit at the dust that was Disney. Now, this story introduces a brand new character in the form of Disney, presumably Walt Disney, or who knows, it could have been Mickey Mouse or something. Either way, you can probably guess the reception it received by those damn Beatlemaniacs, especially when you consider that this was now the 4th time Van Hozel uploaded on Across the Universe. You can also guess how Sgt. Pepper reacted to this story. However, in his very lengthy review of Penny Lane, he finally sees some form of light, because this review is the first time he actually acknowledges Van Hozel as a troll. Well, now I can see how this works, Hans. You are obviously a troll, as you wanted to get a rise out of me. And due to the length and frequency of said rises, it should also be noted that Hans's loyal fanbase seemed to read these reviews too. And of course, because they were fans of Hans, they proceeded to bastardize Sgt. Pepper. And I guess said bastardization must have gotten under Sgt. Pepper's skin. For you see, 2 users by the name of OMFGLOL and Liverpool wrote these respective comments, to which Sgt. Pepper replied to them like this. And yet, it didn't seem to matter, both to Hans's fans as well as Hans himself. And during all of this time, Hans wasn't even done yet. Enter Liverpool Birds. This 4-chapter fanfic that Van Hozel wrote was effectively his, I guess, magnum opus when it came to his fascination with the Beatles. Here's a quote that should at least summarize this story. Squawk, yell Liverpool birds, and they make a chasing of the Beatles. Liverpool, yell the Beatles as they chase around. The media news all makes a gather and laughing at many Beatles. This is goodly, say ABBA, and they make grabbing at some popcorn and a laughing at Beatles. Basically, this story introduces the Liverpool birds, who themselves are from Liverpool. Squawk, at one point in the story, yell "rawr" loudly, and then do stuff with the Beatles and ABBA. This story was conceived in the deepest, darkest parts of Van Hozel's mind, and yet despite that, this story's reception was pretty much identical to the previous Beatles stories Van Hozel made. Pepper himself would upload his own review of this story, but this is actually quite noteworthy, as this would be Sgt. Pepper's final ever critique of Hans Van Hozel's works. This incredibly long wall of text, the final words, spoken and directed to a prolific author by that author's most prolific critic. In any event, Hans would upload 2 more stories for Across the Universe, Hello Goodbye and Internet Computer. The former being a story basically about an English teacher trying to improve the Beatles' vocabulary, only for that teacher to assault them, and the latter a lovely story about how the Beatles commit theft of the internet. Whether or not Pepper viewed these stories is quite unknown, considering that neither one of these stories has a Sgt. Pepper review. There were, of course, a lot of critics besides Sgt. Pepper, but one in particular I just want to point out really had a very interesting character arc. His name was Gymnopédie, and aside from Liverpool Birds, he actually commented on 6 of his 7 stories. And his arc was actually quite hilarious when I was looking at it. Basically, he went from your typical Beatlemaniac pissed over the fact that Hans was disrespecting his favorite band, to eventually becoming corrupted by Hans's wackiness, with his last couple of posts consistently mentioning how he wanted to know what the word "denoued" was, a question he never got answered. If only, then, we were able to witness such an arc from Sgt. Pepper, but instead we effectively got a martyr. someone who constantly stood up for the sanctity of the Beatles, when in actuality he was just speaking into a brick wall. Pepper might have gotten his fair share of supporters, as well as his fair share of haters, but considering how he was able to correctly identify Hans as a troll, only for him to talk to him again post-identification, means that he learned nothing. But thank you for watching.